So Sean, you're taking up that.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Okay. I guess since we started recording, we can get started. For those who don't know me, I'm Steve. I'm the engineer manager on Powershell Core and Windows Powershell. I'll put my left here.
I'm Hemant. I'm a PM manager. I'm PM manager on PowerShell, and I used to be an IC here, but now I just give orders to Joey and others.
I'm Sean Wheeler. I'm the lead writer for PowerShell documentation, and I have a few things to talk about today.
Awesome.
And I'm Tyler. I'm an IC under Steve, and I mostly work on the VS Code extension, PowerShell IoT, and
Various.
a bunch of random things. Anyway.
And active on Twitter.
And active on Twitter.
And unfortunately, Joey can't join us today. He's still on vacation. He'll be back tomorrow. But, we can move on without him. So I think the first thing I kind of want to talk about is the PowerShell Core 6.1 roadmap. If you've been paying attention to either the last community call or some of the tweets I put out, we delayed the 6.1 release in favor of doing some of the Windows module porting work, which I'll talk about later. So the current plan is to get a release candidate out probably by the second week of July. And then I want to kind of hit GA around end of July, early August timeframe. We already have some plans in place for 6.2 and what we want to do there. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we still want to get back to a regular 6-month cadence that aligns with like the rest of Azure, basically. So that means that 6.2 is going to be around early, like the first week of January type of timeframe for general availability. Yeah, Joey. Sad Joey is now becoming happy Joey until he comes back and he's sad Joey again. All right.
We didn't introduce Jeffrey.
No, well, Jeffrey's on the call. He's not physically in the room, but everyone knows Jeffrey.
Okay.
Yeah, so anyway, so for 6.1, the plan is we're trying to get to a release candidate. We'll have about a 2-week. In general, I like to have more, but the time frame is a little bit scrunched for this release. So we'll take very minimal changes after the release candidate goes out, just to kind of lower the risk of any additional regressions, and then we'll hopefully get that out. But once the RC is out, then my team, who's not doing active work on the porting work, will be moving on to 6.2. Now, as far as one thing I'll mention that some of you may have noticed on the GitHub repo or may not have noticed yet, I moved a bunch of issues that were originally marked for 6.1 consider, and the keyword here has always been consider, out of the 6.1 milestone into this new thing I created called future. So rather than continuing moving stuff from 6.0 to 6.1 to 6.2 and potentially 6.3, I created this new milestone called future, which basically represents the PowerShell team's backlog. So that means that these are items that we've looked at to agree, like, I think these are things that we should fix, but we're not committing to any particular time frame. There are still things sitting in the 6.2 consider milestone, and I'm going to end up moving probably all those into the future. And then as we go through our 6.2 planning, we'll try to move stuff into 6.2 that we will be committing to showing up in 6.2. So it'll be more predictable, hopefully, for the community and customers, and also for us. So I think that is the main thing I had about 6.1. If there isn't any questions on that particular topic.
Is there a way community can ask for things to be considered in 6.2?
That's a great question. So I think one thing I want to try to be able to use is the thumbs up capability, because we can query for that on GitHub. If there are things that, like, you guys can always provide feedback, like if I or someone else on the team made a bad call and say, hey, we don't think this is critical for this release, and we move it out. You can always CC me or CC Joey. They'll immediately get our attention and just explain also why you think it's critical for that release and couldn't wait for the next one. Because remember, we have this continuous train now. We do preview ships every 3 weeks to a month, and GAs approximately every 6 months. So it's not like the old Windows world where you have to wait 1 to 3 years kind of thing. However, if there's something that is really important to you that's not getting attention, give it at least one thumbs up, and it's going to be up to you to solicit your peers in the risk community to give it more thumbs up. And we do look at the ones that have a lot of attention. It doesn't mean that we will commit to doing it, because in some cases it's like a breaking change. We have to go through our RC process. In other cases, even though it may seem like a simple thing, it's actually very complicated and the risk of regression is high, so we have to spend more time looking at it. But we do pay attention to all the items, issues that have the thumbs up in terms of the number of them. So do use that as a opportunity to give us that feedback. I think there was a good example. I think Mark was the one who took advantage of that, who got a change in. I don't actually recall those details now. That was a while back, but that was a good change. All right. Anything else on 6.1 before we move on? Let's see. Oh yeah, that was no type information. Yeah, that was pretty awesome. I would actually love to see, and this is me speaking personally, not as PowerShell team, having you guys influence PowerShell Get to install scope current user by default. Still a pain point for me personally, but again, I do what I can. But I think feedback from outside of the team is much more impactful than feedback within the team. So, and that goes for anything that you need from like other teams for commandlet and module support. Again, if there's some other module in Microsoft that you feel like should be compatible with PowerShell Core 6, having you provide that feedback to them is much more impactful than from us. Any sound? I think some people are hearing us, right? Get someone to act that they can hear me, so we know that's
Yes.
Maximo's problem. Okay. Maximo, you have your own issues to deal with. Maybe try disconnecting and reconnecting.
No repro.
All right. Yes, so I'll just talk briefly about 6.2. Yeah. So I think for 6.2 we're trying to not do a ton of feature work because it will be a shorter milestone, partly because we are starting it later because of 6.1 GA, but also because the second half of the calendar year always enters the holiday season, at least in the United States. We have the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. It's a lot of time people take time off like they should, spend time with their family. So we don't have as much time as we would like. So I want to try to spend more time in that time frame, maybe addressing issues brought up by the community, which would be a good thing as well. So we'll see about that. Let's quickly talk about. Talk about the future thing. Okay, so let's maybe move on to the Windows module porting effort. So we talked a bit about this last month. The team has been spending time on that. And I still owe a blog post, yes. Hopefully, so I'm actually out next week playing in the World Series of Poker, and I don't plan on doing work. So I probably won't be able to get around to that till July. So just set some expectation there. But one of the other expectations I want to set with the porting work is as much time as we spend on it, you have to realize that there's a ton of modules in Windows. And I don't have like this huge team, PowerShell Poker module. So we try to do it in two different fronts. One is from a priority perspective. So we looked at what are the main modules that community and partners need. This would be stuff like the AD module, Hyper-V, things like that. And we also looked at trying to get as much coverage as possible. And this is where we're going to have maybe more success. So we're making kind of like a blanket statement where we did some inspection on some of the stuff, but CDXML commands generally should just be working. The code is functionally the same. There are some small issues we found where if a team within Windows did some modification to the generated commandlet, or they have some additional nested commandlets that call into other things, we had to do some inspection to make sure that it was compatible. But for the most part, we're going to, Tyler has been doing this work. He's been kind of updating all the module manifests so that it at least declares that it's compatible to core. Rob on my team is working on the PR that I posted in RFC, I think at least a couple weeks ago, on how we're going to expose that experience. And just to summarize that RFC, if you haven't taken a look at it already, it's really focused on just the Windows System 32 folder. All right, so that's really where we're going to do some enforcement of the compatible PS Editions property within the module manifest. So anything outside of that, that is in the PS module path, we're just going to implicitly trust the user knows what they're doing and will try to use it. So what that means is that for the modules that ship in Windows, that ship in the System 32 folder, which is the majority of them, the ones that shipped are outside would be stuff like Pester and psReadline, which should be a no-op because you can just reinstall those. But basically the idea is that we're going to, for the ones that we know we've done some porting work, which again I'm not guaranteeing will work perfectly fine, so I'll talk maybe about AD module because that's the one I worked on. I found some issues, I fixed those, but because I'm not the owner or expert on the AD module, I did as much testing as I could before I handed it off to that team. I've collaborated with that team. And so there's some stuff I know works pretty well, like get AD user, get AD computer. I predict some stuff won't work because I know there's some issues at runtime because Net Standard doesn't provide a complete promise on the API set. Just go into a small amount of detail. Basically, even with net standard, there's a bunch of APIs that are available, but so compile time is fine, but when you do it during runtime, it will actually throw a platform not supported exception. And that makes it very difficult to know exactly what works and what doesn't work. So I think my plan going forward is that I'm going to create a new repo under the PowerShell org. I haven't figured out what the name of it yet, but it'll be something like Windows PowerShell module compatibility. That may be shorter, I don't know. But basically, we're going to use that repo to track issues. So as you guys start using this experimental feature when a new flight of our Windows 10 goes out, and also when we get the feature in PowerShell Core 6.1 available, then you guys can start opening issues, and my team will work with the Windows partner teams to see how we can address those going forward. So again, you should really think of this porting work as a journey, and we're just starting it now. It's going to go, I imagine, over multiple Windows 10 releases, and again, they're releasing more frequently, so we're not talking about like year-long waits. But it'll be a journey, right? So, and at the end of that journey, whoever knows when that'll finish, the idea is that we'll have as much compatibility as possible. There are some technical challenges for like managed C++ and things like that that you should just use the Windows compatibility module for that stuff. But the majority of them hopefully will be just available natively in PowerShell Core 6. So let's see. I hope someone else is tracking the messaging feed to see if there's anything coming up. Will the ported modules be open source? So there's two questions there. One is open source and one is cross-platform, which sometimes this is implied. So we always encourage our Windows partners to consider open sourcing and or making their modules cross-platform, but it's really up to them. It's not a decision we get to make, and I don't want to take on more code than what my team can handle. So I think right now I'm not aware of any team that plans to open source their modules. The reality is open sourcing is great, because now the community can fix issues rather than waiting for the product team, but it also creates work for the product team. They have to review the PRs, they have to add infrastructure, they have to add governance, all this stuff. So we'll continue to try to push for that, but I'm not aware of any teams that are ready to announce that.
And there is another aspect of teams in Windows. They might be using APIs that is not available outside Windows, or open sourcing them puts them to do extra work of using different kind of APIs. And some of this work is there for last 10 years. So things have changed, but code might not have changed in all the cases. So there is that aspect of not just maintaining open source work, but go and retooling the existing code as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's actually the reason why we still have some modules that the PowerShell team owns that's in Windows PowerShell that isn't in PowerShell Core 6, because it relies on undocumented APIs, and we can't ship those. All right, let's see. Let's move on to editor services and script analyzer, which I'll call V2. So we had an issue open to kind of discuss some of this, and we're at this point moving forward with this plan, which is we're going to drop PowerShell v3 and PowerShell v4 support from the future v2 versions of this stuff. All right, and the main reason for this is that the current code base, since it supports v3, v4, v5, v6, is very complicated, and because we have to support down-level platforms, it actually limits us from supporting some of the newer capabilities in even v5 and v6, so like getting IntelliSense for like classes and things like that. So the idea here is that we want to kind of simplify the code base, allow us to do more innovation going forward and add new capabilities, and a way to do that is to support only PowerShell v5.1 and v6 in the new version of Editor Service and Script Analyzer. We'll continue to support v3 and v4 with the 1.x versions, and support here basically means we're not going to add new features. If the community wants to support PRs for those, we'll still review those, we'll merge it in if it makes sense. But if there's any major bug fixes, we'll definitely still do that for the v1 versions for v3, v4 customers. Otherwise, we need to kind of move forward here so that we can innovate more quickly and do more work. So
I see there was a question about level of API compatibility with Windows.
With the Windows Compat Pack. Let's try to figure out. Can you give more context here? If you're talking about, so for the .NET Windows Compat Pack Exchange, still missing a connection here. Are you talking about the Exchange commandlets? Feel free to just talk on the phone if you want.
Okay. Don't the exchange command still require like PowerShell 2?
Oh,
They require whatever version of PowerShell that ships in Windows.
yeah.
Not.
So we do have active discussions with the Exchange team. I don't have anything to announce at this time, but this is a well-known problem.
And just to add to that, Michael, yes, we had chatted with them long ago as well. There was some interest, and then they got more work, and their priorities shifted based on what the new stuff they wanted. So this would again go down the path that Steve was saying, is tell the Exchange team that you need PowerShell core support there, because in the end there is some work that they need to do. Ideally, what we would like is their client-side commandlets, which does implicit remoting, can move to PowerShell code because you connect to the Exchange endpoint and download all the RBAC-based commandlets on your box.
Yeah, and Jeffrey already mentioned it here, like if whether you're doing implicit remoting yourself or using the Windows compatibility module, that should just work today with the Exchange commands. You just won't be able to run them natively, if you will, within PowerShell Core 6. All right, let's see. I have one more topic before we move on to other things. When I first published the PowerShell Core 6.1 plan, one of the things that was mentioned was making it easier for scripters to do threading in PowerShell script. And at the time, we were evaluating thread job and also PowerShell RS job. So I think where we ended up now is we're going to include thread job into the release candidate build of PowerShell Core 6.1 for kind of like two primary reasons, and maybe a third reason. The main reason really is that it fully adopts or utilizes the PS job semantics. So if you're already familiar with PowerShell jobs, then it should just work very naturally. It has throttling, use all the same commandlets for receive job, stop job, things like that. So it should just fit very naturally there, and it just uses threads instead of processes. The other reason is that this was written in C# by one of the Paul Higginbotham on my team, who actually did a lot of work on PowerShell jobs, so he's familiar with this area. So from a supportability and maintainability, that makes it easier. We're not going to pull the code into our code base, but we're treating it the same as PS readline, and we'll pull it in from the gallery. In fact, Paul today should be publishing a new version of ThreadJob that will support the $ using semantics, and that should make it pretty much complete. And then, so we're again, when we get into release candidate, we're open for feedback. So, provide us that feedback on the PowerShell repo, or you can also, if you have issues with ThreadJob itself, provide that feedback on Paul's repo for ThreadJob, and we'll address those. And then we can allow Sean to maybe talk a little bit about Docs.
Yeah, so I recently updated the contributor guide, broke apart some of the style guidance from Markdown guidance. We're in the process within the Docs organization of shifting the parser that does the HTML rendering to use the MarkDig engine, which enforces the stricter common mark specification for Markdown. So there's some new rules about formatting of Markdown, and during the transition you may see some rendering things look broken. We're going to be trying to fix those, but file issues, or better yet, file PRs to fix them. And I've tried to outline those changes in the style guide, the contributor guide. And I added some more specific instructions about limitations in the PlattyPS processing. The big issue that we run into is in the commandlet reference examples. You can't have paragraphs of text between code blocks. So you can start with a paragraph, followed by multiple code blocks, end with a paragraph, but you can't have paragraphs in between. So it can be difficult to have a narrative discussion about the example. But if you do that, it won't build. So that was added. Also want to talk about recently moved some documents from the PowerShell Source Repo into the Docs Repo. Specifically, these were docs about the breaking changes and the setup instructions for the various platforms. The goal here is to move all of the documentation that's in the source repo that is about how to use PowerShell into docs. So the documentation that's in the source repo should be documenting how to use the repo, how to build the code, those types of things. So unfortunately, that means places that were linking directly to the files in GitHub, those things are broken, but going forward, we should have a more sustainable process. And PowerShell SDK has been moved to the Docs website now, and the redirections went live this morning. If you tried them earlier today, they might have been broken, but that's been fixed now. So we've now got all of that content migrated, and we look forward to help cleaning that stuff up. It hasn't had a lot of love in the last few years. So the redirection is redirecting all of the old MSDN URLs to the home page for the SDK. And that is by design. We plan on reorganizing the data and reorganizing the content. So we don't want to have to keep maintaining a whole bunch of redirects and layers of redirects. So more to come on that.
So Sean, if I understood, you are saying basically the redirect goes to the top level, but the plan is to go to the right place eventually, or will
No, because we're going to change where things land, and
okay.
We'd have to go back and remap redirects or have multiple layers of redirects, and that's just not sustainable.
Okay.
So you're going to land at the top, and you'll be able to, the Docs experience is much easier to navigate and search and filter to find the content that you want. So,
and then over time with the search CEOs, it will start going to
right.
Okay.
And then the last thing is we finally have, a few months ago we hired two more PowerShell writers that joined the team, and they're on the call as well. David Coulter and Bobby Reed, and we're starting to hit our stride and slowly working our way through Docs issues. And as we triage these, we'll be marking them for up for grabs. So be on the lookout for those. We appreciate any help, and looking forward to lots of contributions.
All right. Anything else?
That's all I had.
I don't know if so Jim showed up. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk about for Script Analyzer or PowerShell Standard.
Well, we just did a big release, 1.17 Script Analyzer, which went public a couple of weeks ago, and that was Chris Bergmeister did a whole host of work on that, made it happen. It was really great. And I'm about to push Preview 4. It's been actually uploaded to NuGet after we sorted out some internal stuff, and it'll be public today.
Awesome.
So there'll be a new Preview 4, which should address all the should address all of the open issues as of a week ago.
Now, specifically for PowerShell Standard 5.1, I think at some point we need to decide what we're going to do about PowerShell Standard v3.
Yeah. You should. You can.
But at least PowerShell Standard 5.1, I think our plan is to hit GA within the PowerShell Core 6.1 GA timeframe, and then we'll continue to service it as needed.
I don't know how effective, Standard 3 really is going to be and how much
Yeah.
you actually want to make it available.
And I don't know how much people use it.
I can find out how many downloads there have been, but that's actually not useful.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you how many people are using it.
I think it'd be great for the community to kind of provide some feedback whether or not we should be spending time on PowerShell Standard v3 or not. And provide that maybe in the PowerShell Standard repo, please.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be a great place for it.
All right. Anyone else have any topics? Otherwise, we can just maybe open it up. Tyler, anything cool you want to talk about?
Let's see. On Twitter, I've been doing a lot of work with getting our release process for editor services and VS Code to be more automated. And so my thought behind this is if we can get to a point where it's 100% automated, we can have some sort of preview version of the extension, similar to how VS Code has the insiders and the stable version of VS Code itself, and kind of following that model. Still experimenting with it, like questions about like what happens if you have both insiders and non-insiders installed at the same time and stuff like that. But that's the plan, so you all can try a lot of the work and help us catch some issues before releasing like a stable version. But yeah, coming soon.
Any update on PS Reline support?
Oh yeah, there's been a pull request out thanks to Patrick, goes by Seemingly Science on the internet. He